Twitch, and welcome back. I am still Abby, and I'm here with Arun Gupta and Nathan Peck. Arun is a principal technologist on the open source team. Nathan Peck is one of the developer advocates for containers here at AWS. Guys, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
So first things first, can you both tell me a little bit about what you do here at AWS?
Yeah, totally. I'm a principal open source technologist at AWS. I work in the open source team, particularly very closely with the containers and serverless teams, helping define their open source strategy.
I work as a developer advocate on the container services team. I spent a lot of time working on open source examples, reference architectures, blog posts, as well as going to events like this and talking about ECS, EKS, Fargate, and how companies can use that as part of their business process.
Okay, so lightning round for those of us that don't know on the chat, because I think we have some newbies. What is Kubernetes and why are people using it?
Yeah, Kubernetes is an open source orchestrator which allows you to schedule your containers in a very open source way. So essentially, when you are building containerized applications, you have a Docker container, and that Docker container needs to be scheduled across multiple hosts. So Kubernetes provides an open source API by which you can take that container and then schedule it across multiple hosts. Where are those hosts running? Those hosts are running in a cloud provider like AWS. And so you have like a control plane, which is sort of which manages the Kubernetes cluster, and then you have a data plane, which is the worker nodes where your actual Kubernetes pods are running. So essentially you take your Java, Node, C#, whatever that language is, take that application, Dockerize it, write a Kubernetes manifest on it, and then deploy that application on a Kubernetes cluster.
And I saw someone in the chat ask what a container was. Is that just a package of software that includes everything that it needs to run? So the application code, binaries, libraries, dependencies, it's all together in that same package. Docker is a really popular format for those containers.
And I think one of the things I want to add about Kubernetes is, if you look at the recent CNCF survey, 57% of the companies that run Kubernetes, they run it on AWS. And so we have always been very customer focused, customer obsessed, as a matter of fact. So 90 to 95% of our roadmap is driven by customers. So we listen to customers, and at reInvent, we announced this Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, which is basically a managed control plane. And so customers can go to AWS console, provision AWS or EKS control plane, bring their worker nodes, attach it to the control plane, and run their applications over there.
So I know the question that I get asked a lot then is EKS regular Kubernetes, or is it some sort of special Amazonian Kubernetes? So just to set the record straight, is it special or not?
Well, no, it is not. Well, one of the core tenets of EKS is 100% upstream compatibility. So what that means is, whatever is available in upstream, that means in github.com/Kubernetes, we take that and we operationalize it. So that's pretty much the way we do it with all open source projects, as a matter of fact. So what that means from customer perspective is, if you are running a particular version of Kubernetes, so EKS today supports version 110. So if you're running 110 on-prem, you can exactly bring the same manifest in an upstream way and deploy them on EKS. So there is no fork, no internal versions being maintained. All the fixes that we have made are going to be in upstream. There is a CNI plugin that is again done in upstream. Every work that we have done is fully upstream compatible.
And that said, one of the things that we do that does make EKS special is we do provide customizations to really make EKS a fantastic experience when you're running on AWS. So for example, one of the things that we've done is we provide Heptio Authenticator plugins. So that way you can use your IAM role that you're always used to using with AWS CLI or with other AWS tools, and you can use that to actually communicate to your Kubernetes masters and control the entire cluster. And so we've created this curated set of extensions and setup for your Kubernetes cluster that works really well with all the other AWS services.
And another point to add to that also is 100% certified, 100% conformant. So CNCF runs a conformance test, and so it is 100% conformant. That means any 110 compliant implementation, if you're running your applications, it gives you the ability to bring it easily on EKS as well.
I heard a rumor that you have some sort of demo slide situation, explanation situation happening.
Yeah, so
and I want to see it.
We can just show really quickly what the pieces of Kubernetes are, just for anybody who is perhaps new to Kubernetes, not really understanding what Kubernetes is made up of. I have a little diagram here that shows your container, the worker nodes, these are what actually provide the capacity which will run your container. The masters, which are what controls what's running and keeps track of these worker nodes, tells them to run your container or tells them to stop running your container. And then there's etcd, which is the state store. It's really a database which keeps track of everything in the cluster and what you want the state of the cluster to be. And traditionally, you would probably use a tool like Kops to set all of this up on your AWS account. Set up those worker nodes, set up those master nodes, and set up that etcd database. But that came with some challenges because etcd is a database, and running a database is hard. Anybody who says that running a database is easy, maybe they aren't running that database, high availability, it's not backed up.
Yeah.
There's a lot of challenges that go into running a database. And so, as you mentioned earlier, one of the pieces of feedback we heard from customers was they wanted us to help manage that control plane. And so with Amazon EKS, the picture looks more like this diagram. Here on the left, you can see there is the container and worker nodes, which are still your responsibility. But on the right-hand side, Amazon EKS takes care of those masters and takes care of the etcd for you.
And if you go back a slide, actually, as a matter of fact, in Kops, if you think about this, Kubernetes documentation says your master should be sized in a certain way, based upon the number of pods deployed in your cluster. And the master size needs to be upgraded or downgraded to have optimal performance. Now, it's your responsibility to make sure that the master is constantly being patched up. So day one experience may be okay, but what becomes interesting is day two, a new version of Kubernetes comes up. Now my etcd has crashed up. How do I take care of that? Am I following, even if I'm using Kops to deploy a cluster, am I following the right practices that AWS recommends in terms of security, availability zones, regions, sizing, networking? So that's also a challenge with Kops in that sense. I mean, Kops has done a lot of goodness for us. If you look at that 57% number that came out in last December, so it's heavily driven by that. But I think there are a bit of a challenges with Kops that EKS attempts to solve.
For sure. And so not only with Amazon EKS, but we're going to help solve another challenge, taking it one step further. And another challenge that you face is, how do I know how many worker nodes to run in order to run the amount of containers I need to run to serve my business workload? And so we released for Amazon ECS service AWS Fargate, which helps solve that problem. It allows you to just run containers in the cloud without needing to worry about a pool of hosts. We've announced that we will also provide AWS Fargate support for EKS as well.
So can you give me, so I know that I saw a question from Twitch a couple minutes ago. If EKS was just ECS for Kubernetes, can you give us the really quick overview of what the difference is between all of the AWS container acronyms, so ECS versus EKS versus Fargate?
So ECS is the very first container orchestration platform that we created at Amazon. And we created it in order to provide the greatest amount of scaling, provide the greatest integration with other AWS services, so we created it fully natively to integrate with CloudWatch, everything else from the very beginning. EKS is our hosted system for running the Kubernetes masters for you. There's also ECR, which is Elastic Container Registry. That's something that when you build that container on your local machine, you need to get it into the cloud in order to run it there. ECR, Elastic Container Registry, is where you would push that container, and then that works for both Kubernetes on Amazon and ECS on Amazon as a place where I can fetch that container back from. And then AWS Fargate is an engine for running a Docker container without needing to worry about EC2 hosts. So think in the same way that EC2 gives me the ability to get a VM on demand anytime I want without having to provision physical hardware, likewise, AWS Fargate gives me a running container in the cloud without needing to provision a VM to run it on.
And another way I like to look at it is, if you see ECS today you have to create a cluster, bring your worker nodes, attach to it, and that's called as the EC2 mode, because you are essentially responsible for managing that cluster. Now, cluster is still an administrative aspect of Fargate, but you're saying, take my container and run it. And behind the scenes in the control, there is no concept of a control plane over there. We just run it for you, and we scale it for you automatically. So today, if you look at EKS gives you a EC2 mode, where you bring your worker nodes and attach it to the control plane, but with the Fargate integration in the near future, or whenever it happens, that gives us the ability where you just bring it to your Kubernetes manifest, and we will manage it for you automatically.
So in a stroke of excellent luck, Twitch asked the perfect follow-up question already, which is, how do I decide which container service to use? It was almost like I scripted this, but I didn't. They really actually asked that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the way we look at it is ECS was launched in 2014 reInvent, so almost 3.5 years ago. So if you are an all-in customer, if you are looking for something integration with CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and a deep integration with IAM and all of those services, where the API doesn't matter to you. I mean, today, if you look at it, ECS launches hundreds of millions of containers every week. So if that is the scale you're looking at it, it's highly multi-tenant. That is the scale you're looking at it, then ECS is your way to go. But if open source matters to you, if the ability to run it on-prem matters to you, if you really want Kubernetes because other teams are using it as well, then EKS is the way for you to go. And then the third scale is basically the Fargate part of it. You know what? I just want to run my containers. I don't want to manage any of these APIs. I just want AWS to do the undifferentiated heavy lifting for me. Then go with Fargate. So I would recommend to customers to start with Fargate and then look at it. What are your API compatibilities and your on-prem versus running in the cloud requirements, and then pick one or the other.
I want to add too that for me it's a lot about the level of control that I need and the level of control that I want. And I always want to kind of go for the least amount of control because, so Nathan and I worked together at a previous job too, and it was only us doing it. So I would have used something like Fargate from the beginning because it meant that we had more kind of operational bandwidth to work on other things that weren't kind of keeping everything together. But some people are doing these really cool custom things through like EC2 user data, or they have third-party plugins that they're trying to use for Kubernetes, so they need that level of control, but some people don't. So I think you want to go on what level of control you need from your infrastructure as well.
Yeah, because EKS being a managed service, you of course don't get control of the masters. But if you do want to get a control of the masters, let's say you want to enable a certain admission controller, then EKS may not work for you, then you may be looking for your COPS-based cluster on AWS.
So another question from Twitch. Do you have to provision EC2 before using EKS? Would you do that with CloudFormation or Fargate? So I think we half answered that, by the way. So Fargate is the underlying technology that lets you just run containers without provisioning the infrastructure. So for ECS and EKS, you can provision EC2 instances, and maybe you guys can talk a little bit about how I could do that.
Yeah, so for EKS, we provide a CloudFormation template that will help you to launch the latest EKS optimized AMI that will self-register itself inside of your Kubernetes cluster. And so it's just a very simple CloudFormation template. You dial up however many you want, and you can go in there and update that number to add more or reduce the number of EC2 instances. And so we've tried to make it as easy as possible, give you a template that works out of the box to add as many EC2 hosts as you need to run your pods.
And something I'm excited about coming from the open source perspective is we recently open sourced our Packer scripts, because essentially those armies are built using HashiCorp Packer scripts, and what that means is you can actually create your own worker nodes armies using those Packer scripts. So let's say you don't, our armies are built using Amazon Linux too. If you want to use a certain operating system, or if you want certain components to be baked into the army by default, then you can use those Packer scripts, create your own armies, bring those armies, use the same CloudFormation template, and then get your worker nodes up and running.
So a question from Twitch, how do you upgrade your EKS cluster?
Yeah, there is a nice upgrade strategy. If you look at Kubernetes versioning, it's a very semantic versioning, so major, minor, and patch. So 1.10.1, for example, 1 is major, 10 is minor, 1 is like the patch version. We don't give you a choice between the patch version because those are typically CVEs, security fixes, bug fixes. So we automatically upgrade you for that as and when it's available. Now the important part to realize is when we are doing the upgrade, it's a hot upgrade. That means the server doesn't go down at all.
Right.
The server is always available behind a load balancer for you. So we take care of the masters for you automatically on the patch versions. On the worker nodes, we do give you a control because they are running in your account. So essentially, we'll give you upgrade scripts that, okay, a new version is now available or a new army is available. So do a rolling upgrade of the worker. Now come the major and the minor version, the customers can choose either a manual upgrade or an auto upgrade. In auto upgrade, we take care of the upgrade of it automatically. Once again, rolling upgrade, hard upgrade, nothing goes down, or at least the server goes down, but the other two are up. And in case of manual, you can choose that, okay, now I want to manually upgrade the cluster. So lots of choices for the customers to upgrade.
So changing gears for a little bit, I know that part of what makes Kubernetes so strong has been the community. So can you talk a little bit about how both AWS is working with the community and then some of the tooling that I have available to me from the open source community that lets me work with Kubernetes?
Yeah, so we were very proud that a large number of partners, I don't remember, do you remember the exact number?
20 plus when we launched EKS.
20 plus partners launched on day one with support for EKS, and they had already tested out their software to ensure that it worked well on EKS. And so one of the things we're doing coming up, I have a little slide up if they can put it up on the stream. We are celebrating for the third birthday of Kubernetes. We're having an AWS ecosystem day here in New York where we're going to bring in some of these partners to talk about how they can make your Kubernetes experience on AWS with EKS better. And registration is open, so definitely check out that link. Maybe we can get the mods to also drop that link into the chat if somebody is able to do that.
And that's tomorrow.
That's Thursday.
July 19th.
Thursday.
July 19th.
July 19th.
And it's at the WeWork in Bryant Park, and I'm going to guess that the mods will post a link to the event page, but it's at the WeWork Bryant Park, and it is on Thursday. Unless I've also forgotten what day it was, in which case maybe it's tomorrow.
So if you're a New York local, definitely go check that out. There's going to be all sorts of very fascinating presentations there, and you'll get a chance to get hands-on and learn more about Kubernetes.
And talking a little bit about the open source perspective, the CNI plugin that we wrote, because that allows pods to get first-grade VPC networking. That is fully open sourced. The HEP2 authenticator that Nathan was talking about, that's fully open source. We are very actively participating in the SIG AWS contributions. Bob Wise, who's the GM for EKS, is now driving the SIG AWS efforts. We're very actively engaged over there. So for example, the CoreOS ALB ingress controller, we moved that as a sub-project of SIG AWS because that's the one we think is the right one, if you want to integrate an ingress controller. So there are lots of efforts that have been done. And again, really keeping with the core tenet of being upstream compatible, open source compatible, all of these efforts are done out in the open source, so that in case you want to pick up those open source components by yourself and set up your cluster, you're good to go.
And it's nice, I think, because something that I was getting a lot of questions before EKS was generally available was, will the tools and open source projects that I'm already using work with EKS? And I think that's something that we took really seriously, was that yes, your tooling should still work whether you're running self-hosted Kubernetes on AWS or whether you're using EKS.
Well, that's the whole value promise of being open source, because all this innovation is happening around the world, and we want to be able to leverage that for EKS customers as well.
So I have time for one last question for Twitch, and they said, are you contributing to Kubi, to IAM, or KIAM?
Yeah, so those are a couple of initiatives which our customers are looking at it on how to assign IAM access to pods running in the Kubernetes cluster. So Kube2 IAM is what a lot of our customers are using, and some are using KIAM as well. But there are some security holes that we are not super excited about, particularly in Kube2 IAM, because it requires the node to assume any role. So that means there's a potential security risk. In the long term, what we are looking at is SPIFFE, which is a portable container identity framework, and the implementation is Spire. So we'll see how SPIFFE and Spire kind of evolve over the next period of time, and then eventually we will adapt that from the Kubernetes perspective.
Okay, guys, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been great. And Twitch, we will be back in just a couple minutes with another session live from the AWS Summit in New York City.